Hi, I'm Guy Powell, and welcome to the February episode of the Backstory on Marketing. If you haven't already done so, please visit ProRelevant.com and sign up for all of these episodes and podcasts. I am the author of the upcoming book, The Post-COVID Marketing Machine: Prepare Your Team to Win. You can find more information on this at my website, marketingmachine.prorelevant.com. Today, we're speaking with Ethan Chernofsky. He is the Vice President of Marketing for Placer.ai. And prior to Placer, he held senior marketing roles at SimilarWeb and Headline Media. Welcome, Ethan.
Thank you so much, Guy. Great to be here.
Yeah, so glad to have you. I'm always really impressed with the Placer offering, and I just find that whole technology to be fascinating. But before we get started, tell us a little bit about the genesis of how you got into marketing.
Sure. So I actually my marketing career started in kind of public relations and the PR side of things. And originally I finished kind of grad school and I wanted to be a journalist, and I had offers to go work at a couple of outlets. And I saw how much those outlets were paying, and we were pregnant with our first child. And I realized that I probably wasn't going to be a journalist. So I went to PR thinking it was the flip side of journalism. Obviously, it's far from it, but it was just this really interesting entry point into marketing and getting to work with, dozens of really exciting companies and understand how they approach marketing, how they view the building of brands, and then taking that's kind of how my career got kicked off.
Yeah, interesting. And I guess PR, the opposite of journalism would be maybe PR for like a politician or for a whatever, or something like that. But yeah, PR in the business world is definitely not journalism. Well, I don't mean to say it's not journalism, but certainly different.
It's fascinating because I think it's your first. I mean, the really big value that comes from starting the career in PR is you are slapped in the face with I guess unless you work for like Apple or Uber, you're slapped in the face with the idea that nobody cares. And if the starting point is nobody cares, you need to figure out how to make them care. And that means telling your story in an effective way. It means really thinking about the audience of your audience. It means understanding how to create that win-win with the channel you're looking to tell your story through. And so many of the lessons that you learn in that PR setting are widely applicable as you kind of expand your marketing focus in these kind of in-house roles.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and in reality, that's what marketing is all about. And certainly geolocation services, makes that even better. So, where you really then know exactly who your client is, and almost in many cases, you can almost get down to a one-to-one relationship to where you are really personalizing that message and that experience specifically for that person.
So it's so interesting because I think the geolocation space in its kind of widest reach, you have this spectrum. So on the one hand, you do have kind of companies that attempt to enable that one-to-one relationship and kind of location-based advertising. And in that case, think, I love Starbucks. I love blueberry muffins. When I walk past a Starbucks, they want to be able to say, Ethan, get 50 cents off this blueberry muffin if you buy a coffee too. That is a really interesting kind of channel. There's a lot of value to it. It's super fascinating. What's really interesting is how different that is from what we do, though we're part of the same space. So Placer, when we kind of think of ourselves, is really a research platform. And it's enabling you to understand what's happening at a macro level at retailers across the country. So if you think like, people vote with their feet, we're showing you how they vote. But the really interesting thing is it's essentially a storytelling platform. So whereas like an advertising platform would say, again, how do I reach Ethan when he walks past a Starbucks? We're a platform that's giving you all this information about what's happening in the world. And then we're saying to the marketers that utilize it, okay, now that you have this information, what decisions would you make differently? How would you operate a little bit more effectively? And I think that research orientation has been really fascinating, especially as a marketer working for Placer.
Well, and especially also, you're not necessarily just getting, a sample size through some survey, and it's never large enough. And then here, you can basically say, hey, I did this ad, and and 45% of the people that we were kind of targeting in these regions went to the retail location or did something different, and then but over here something else happened. And that level of information is incredibly valuable to a marketer, as they're now really trying to always get that last 0.5%, 1%, 5% better, and this kind of capability really allows them to do that.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I think that the fascinating thing is, in so many areas, it is that incremental improvement of, we're doing a really good job, we want to get a little bit better at all these elements. But in so many cases, it's just a fundamental shift in how they view a process. When you think of something as simple as a trade area, right? So every retail location, every restaurant has their assumption about who they're reaching with any given location. And if you think about just 5-6 years ago, this was a circle drawn around the space and at a certain mile radius length, and said, this is what it is. This is who we reach. And when you look at the actual true trade areas within our system, you see that you see that trade area in all of its amorphous, weirdly shaped glory, and it challenges very basic assumptions about how you would operate, where you're succeeding, where you're missing an opportunity, how close by that opportunity might be, how far you're actually reaching, and why. So I think this ability to provide that level of clarity and visibility, at the worst case, it's the incremental progress. But in many situations, it's just bringing a lens that provides visibility that just wasn't there before.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly, you bring up retail trade area, but the flip side of that is also, where do I place my stores? And so you also have then the development side on for retail, so that they can make sure that the traffic patterns and whatever else is really ideal for that location and for that business versus somewhere else. So really fascinating how you can use the data.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you think about the life cycle, the entire life cycle of a retail location. I'm trying to figure out what site I want to build a shopping center in. I drop a traffic pin to understand who's passing by and what are the audiences nearby, and is there an opening? And okay, then we decide there is. We build this center. What should we fill it with? Who should we be able to get this great anchor tenant? Who has the best cross shopping and co-tenancy patterns with that? All right, that center continues on. What marketing events do we want to run to help drive traffic to that center? How do the retailers within that center better leverage the data to make these decisions? But then someone else comes in and they want to buy that center and make that decision and how to reorient it. And so the whole life cycle of a retail location, whether it's the shopping center, the specific retail space itself, the ability to provide value throughout this, from the start to finish of that life cycle, is one of the things that I think gives the platform a whole lot of power. And it gives us this really interesting viewpoint to start trying to understand what are the factors that influence success or lack thereof on a, whether it's by retail segment, by retailers, by a specific retailer, or by region, by type. It makes it really interesting when you can get to that level of granularity.
Yeah, absolutely. And then not only that, but you can also see what's going on with your competitors. And so you can see, what your traffic pattern is or could be. And then you can also see then, there's a competitive store, a mile away or in the same shopping center or wherever it is. And you can then start to see whether, whether their advertising or your advertising has an impact, but also then generally how the whole category is working. And I think that information is so much better than what you otherwise get. So yeah.
It's not even, it's all of a sudden you're able to view everything through a single lens. So one of the biggest challenges with data is having proper context. And so, we say this at the time, if you're a retailer in a specific region and during the pandemic, your visits were down 5%. Is that good? Is that bad? That it means nothing in and of itself. Because if I'm down 5%, but all of my competitors are down 10%, I'm doing great. If I'm down 5%, my competitors are up 20%, I'm getting crushed. And so that contextual understanding of performance and the ability to then go a level deeper and say, okay, why? And how do I break this resource down in other ways to give me an indication of what are they doing well that I'm missing out on? Where are there opportunities that I might want to focus on in the future? How do I get, one of the things I always love is when you think of a concept, we will look at a brand, Sephora launches their store-in-store concept, right? With Kohl's. When we look at Petco and Lowe's, we're taking that Sephora Kohl's interaction as some sort of benchmark. There's a way to learn from that experience. And that's across retail. And I think what's really fascinating is if you could learn from other people, if you could understand what competitors are doing, if you could take inspiration from sectors that you're not even operating in, that's what this product gives you the ability to do, to almost kind of transport yourself to any retail location and get that insights as if you were visiting the center itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find it also valuable not only for retailers, but the manufacturers that are selling in retail, and so that they can see that when they run a brand ad or the retailer runs a co-op ad, to see then what the impact is on traffic patterns, and whether they're actually driving people to the store or not, and whether then the overall traffic goes up. Maybe any ad raises all boats, but it could be that my ad actually gets people into my stores or my retail outlets better than what the competition does. So there's also a value at the manufacturer level.
Completely. I had a colleague who put it best. Someone asked him, who gets value out of Placer data? And by the way, obviously I'm incredibly biased. I think we're the greatest platform in this space. And, data in general for these spaces, I think it's important to kind of give that wider lens. But this colleague said, drive down your street, and the main road in your town, how many shopping centers do you see? All of those are customers. How many tenants do you see filling the spaces in those shopping centers? Think of all the products and services that are sold through those tenants, the people who build around it. That's the people who invest in those companies, the people who kind of the civic organizations that are attempting to attract those retailers into their communities. This is the breadth that you can reach. And I think one of the elements that we get most excited about is that ability to establish a single language to cross those chasms between. And you're bringing up the manufacturing brands is a really important one. We saw this during the pandemic. We had a customer tell us that year over year data, they would having a discussion with a major retailer about demand planning. And year over year data was you threw it out the window because what were you supposed to do with it? The situation was so different.
Yep.
The point of sale data that they got was 4 to 6 weeks delay. 4 to 6 weeks, things change so dramatically. And they were looking at visit data and correlating demand with visit data because that they could get with a 3-day lag. And so what's so fascinating is, in a changing environment, what we've seen in the last 2 years is just this rapidly changing scenario where you need to adapt so quickly. I think data helps in any situation, but if you don't have data to help you make those decisions and pivot as effectively as possible, you're going to be over-reliant on guesses, and it's going to put you at risk.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially nowadays, if your competitor has the tool and you don't, they are absolutely at an advantage. And I don't know how much difference it would be, but it can be significant, for retailers. Now, what about other industries? Where else would you see the use of this kind of data?
So I think retail's the primary space, but it's all the spheres of retail. So again, the shopping center, the retail real estate, the manufacturing companies, the investors, the civic organizations. And so just that is quite a sizable group of companies.
Yeah.
When you think also office real estate, if I'm dealing with multifamily at a large scale, this is going to be interesting data. Just understanding the shifts in areas. So take something as simple as migration patterns and how different they've been as a result of the pandemic. So really interesting data that we've seen, but also from other sources like Urban Digs, which looks at leasing patterns in New York City. And you found at certain points during the pandemic, there was this really fascinating shift of people who were a little bit older, maybe had stuck around in major cities a little bit longer than they would have traditionally, moving to the suburbs, and that being replaced by younger people who could now afford to move into the city. And what's really interesting here is if I understand those patterns and those shifts on an area level, I can identify opportunity. So Raleigh, North Carolina, great proximity to amazing universities. People can choose flexibility and therefore emphasize an area with a higher quality of life. They don't have to spend as much living in, let's say, San Francisco. They can stay there and still find a really high quality tech job. And that understanding of where those shifts are happening, where that opportunity might exist, is a really powerful lens that can be used to make much better decisions for the companies who are operating at that scale.
Yeah, absolutely, and very interesting. I didn't think about the the patterns of how people changed and where they moved to and from during the pandemic versus pre-pandemic, and now maybe post-pandemic. So that makes a lot of sense. So if I'm a retailer, and let's say I don't know, Lowe's, or maybe that's not a good example, but if I'm a major retailer and got stores around the country, what is their ROI? So what's the ROI on your data? What is the value to them? It's got to be pretty big. What is it?
So it's going to be different values for different groups of the company. So in the ideal scenario, your site selection team is using the product to figure out where should we put the next store, try to understand which stores are performing well and which ones aren't. I need to right size because I'm overextended in a certain region. Which store do I remove? Do I remove the store that has the highest sales, the lowest sales, or do I move the store that's cannibalizing the most? And by removing it, I'd have the least impact on an overall market. How do I understand performance over time? How do I understand it compared to kind of the key competitors? And that takes us already into kind of that competitive intelligence strategy team. How am I really understanding my performance? So if we try a new initiative, how we're doing overall, how is the wider space we're operating in again doing overall? So think for, Lowe's is a great example. Lowe's, Home Depot, Tractor Supply, setting the world on fire in 2020. 2021, a lot of those months, visits are down year over year, but it's not because they did bad. It's because they just went so high that when they dropped back, they were still higher than they were before. But the only way to understand that is by having a context for the entire market. Then as a marketer, I want to do other things. I want to know how different campaigns worked in different regions. I want to understand the impact of my competitors' campaigns and what's moving the needle there, and understanding how do I figure out which types of activities are really moving the needle for my organization. So this ability to go from that market planning, site selection, real estate team, to the store operations team, to the strategy team, to the marketing team, and enable all of them to have that conversation with the same data. That's one of the biggest pieces. And I mean, I'm not telling you anything that's going to surprise you, but one of the biggest challenges with data is that even within an organization, many of us are using different tools. And so I say I'm seeing X percentage change based on this tool. And they say, well, I don't see that. I see something totally different with my tool. So the idea that you have a language that can help traverse those divides and can be used by all these organizations, I think that's almost, as valuable as anything. We were talking, before the show about, different places in the world and different languages. If you put a German speaker, a French speaker, an Italian speaker, and someone who speaks Japanese in the same room and ask them to do a collective task, it's going to be a lot harder than if everyone's speaking German or English or whatever it may be. And I think that's one of the things we view as a huge long-term value, is that ability to have that single language.
Yeah, absolutely. And way back when, I'm sure you're familiar with the Kodak brand and Kodak film and stuff like that. And I remember talking to the VP of research, and he said, what's really bad, and what he tried to do within the company, is have a benchmark and a language that everybody can use, so that if everybody gets their bonus, the CEO also gets his bonus. Because he said what had happened is everybody made their numbers. They all, figured out how to game the system. And the CEO says, well, yeah, but sales went down. Where's my money? And so to your point about using common language across the company is critical, because it has to then be something that really aligns exactly with your corporate objectives. And if it doesn't, if you're measuring the wrong thing, then garbage in, garbage out. It's not going to be helpful for anybody.
Yeah, I think company alignment. It's interesting. I joined this company when we were 20 some odd people. Today we're well over 300, and the strength you get as an organization when you are viewing the world as a unit and not as lots of disparate elements all pulling in different directions is a huge asset. For us, it's a credit to our leadership, and to the people, the founders, and those who had that initial vision were able to pull all of us into that vision. And I think it's anywhere. The more you can create alignment in how you're viewing the world, the better you'll be able to attack it as a group.
Yep, absolutely. So now, of course, then there's the all this kind of privacy and legislation coming out. Tell us how Placer fits in that, and what do you see kind of as the future for those discussions?
So I think, again, we kind of touched on this at the top of this spectrum of companies and what you're trying to do. So you can almost think of it as relating to three core questions. What type of data do you take in? What type of data do you show? And what type of data do you make money off of? So again, partially because it's a key part of our ethos, but also, we're a company that, we only launched in 2018. So GDPR was already a thing. CCPA was already a thing. So we're a privacy by design company, meaning we don't ingest any personally identifiable information into our system. So we don't take in any personal information. We certainly don't show anything in our platform. When you build in processes to ensure that, any place under a certain number of people, you don't show on the platform at all. And so you create these built-in limitations so as to account for privacy. And then all we sell is our estimations. And so that's the product ultimately. And in that way, we make sure that we're aligned with privacy interests. And I think what you want to ultimately see in the space is two things. One, regulation that makes sense for the different players within the space. So if I want, again, to do that location-based advertising, which means I want to know where Ethan is right now, okay, but then there should be a very specific set of regulations and opt-ins and the like. And the same for research companies, that we need to be treated in this very specific way to ensure that our practices are in line with user interests. And I think the more sophisticated we get about this conversation, the better regulations we're going to come to, the better products we're going to build. But I also think it's unbelievably important to the simplicity that happens in the privacy debate is not very helpful, because it misses out on the levels of nuance and the fact that there is so much opportunity to find that win-win where you can provide the value without having to infringe on privacy.
Yeah, and I agree with that. Of course, I'm in marketing, and I think that advertising messages have a value, and people are interested in them, because at the end of the day, they are going to buy something, and it's much better to have them more well-informed so that they're going to have a better customer experience, and they're going to be more satisfied with what they buy, as opposed to buying something that may not fit. So marketing to some extent is also about education. And so I think, getting that stuff right is critical.
But it's also, what's the value ultimately? If
Yeah.
you think, all right, think about Sears. Sears wasn't a stupid company. They were incredibly successful. They were overextended. And therefore, it was really challenging to have to make the moves as quickly as they needed to in order to adjust. What if Sears had been able to right-size their properties more slowly over time with data like this? They're likely still around today. Look at Macy's or JCPenney, companies who are amidst these more significant right-sizing projects. And they're doing so really strategically. And that means that more Macy's are staying open, serving their audiences, keeping the people who have jobs there going, paying rent to the shopping centers that they're sitting in. It's a net positive, but even think about the small business. So Guy, imagine you and I, we decide to open our own pizza chain. And we open up our first one in Atlanta, Georgia. Right. And we open up our second one in a suburb of Atlanta, Georgia. And we're doing well with both. It's time to open up number 3. And we're choosing between 3 locations. The problem is, if we get it right, great. If we get it wrong for a business as small as ours, it's going to have a massive impact on our company. It might even close it. So the fact that we can have access to affordable data, not just something that Pizza Hut and Domino's can use, but us and our small pizza chain can use, increases the likelihood that we can go from 1 store to 3 stores to 10 to 50. And that ability to kind of support that 50 to 100 location chain, the smaller ones even than that, creates this much greater diversity, this much better ability of smaller businesses to grow and scale and to do so in a sustainable way that creates a net benefit for the wider economic situation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And fair enough. You went more on the research side, which absolutely has value, and and definitely see that because here you have an investor as me, the pizza owner, and you and the pizza owner here in Atlanta. And if we are able to make those decisions better, we are going to be able to hire more people. And also, that is a benefit not only to those people, but to the customers that are interested in what we're selling. And so, that makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting. I like the other point that you make is that you're more on the research side as opposed to the execution side. And I think that's a very different or a very interesting distinguishing characteristic in terms of what you're offering versus what you might typically see as geolocation services in optimizing my advertising and getting them these kind of unwanted or maybe not so wanted commercials, or believed to be unwanted commercials.
Yeah, I think we need to empower the consumer. I mean, this was, to talk in our kind of advertising marketing language, how this wasn't all that long ago. We were having a big conversation about native advertising. And there were some people who were like, this is the worst thing that's ever happened in the world. And others who were like, this is the greatest. The reality was somewhere in between. But we need to take the steps to ensure that consumers, users, viewers, readers are given enough information so that they understand what's happening in front of them. And they can make those decisions, and that native advertising conversation. Look, we've been looking at editorial content for years. We didn't ban it because it's an opinion. We said, we have to make it clear that it's an opinion, but that's okay. We can consume opinion too. So I think if we focus on end user empowerment, giving them easy access to the tools to make the decisions to opt in and out of what they do and don't want, but also that they understand what they're seeing, I think we're going to end up in a much better situation than attempting to create kind of blanket restrictions that don't necessarily make sense and most people probably don't want.
Yeah, well, and unfortunately, on legislation and regulation, it has to do then also with the education of the legislators and the regulators, so that they really can understand the difference and the value that's behind there. Because I think you're right. I mean, some of these proposed legislation, and they're kind of like, hey, we're going to block everything, and that really doesn't make sense. So yeah, and absolutely. So let's talk about the future. Where and how or what do you see as the promised land in 3 or 4 years from now for Placer?
I think there's a couple of things. I think there's 3 pillars. Pillar number 1 is continuing to build out our own platform, right? So how do we continue adding features, creating simpler workflows? So I have a specific business question. Here's the tool that helps you answer that specific question as quickly as possible, right? So to empower our users to get from point A to point B faster than ever before, and to give them more ways, more point A's and point B's to get to. The second level is a big focus on what we kind of our marketplace, which is our marketplace brings in other data sources. So like demographics data into the platform so that they can be layered on top of our platform and more easily accessed and utilized. And so this investment in how do we expand the number of perspectives that we can bring into play so that we can understand a space and something that's happening in the physical world more effectively. So a simple example, traffic is down year over year in a certain space. what if I showed you that there was a massive storm that day and that's why it was down? All of a sudden you have more information to get to that decision understanding faster. If I show you a place and I show you the crime rates around it, and I show you planned developments that are happening, and I show you drive time analysis, and I show all of these other layers, it's only going to enrich your ability to make better decisions based off of the data. So that's a huge focus for us as well. So enhancing our capacity, partnering with more companies that enable to bring in all these new perspectives into the mix. So we have this wider view on what's happening. And I'd say the last bit is a constant effort to improve those areas that are the pillar of what we do. So how do we get ever better on the data accuracy side? So if we feel like, we've got a 5% margin of error, how do we get it to 4.5%, 4%, et cetera? How do we get better at partnering with our customers? So understanding their needs better, being more as invested as we can be at scale. And then the accessibility piece. How do we make it as simple to use? I think one of the things that always is ever present, especially when you talk to more experienced professionals, is they'll look at a platform like this and they'll be like, oh, this is great, but I never know how to use this. This is too complicated for me. And we very aggressively push back on this concept. I think, you learning to utilize data, and there's always going to be space for consultants and those who under data science teams and those who really get it internally and externally. But the more we teach people to become familiar and to engage with and to show that actually we're kind of constantly dealing with data every single day of our lives, and most of us are using it quite effectively, that level of engagement is just going to increase that conversation that we were talking about before, which is going to make the wider ecosystem for data so much more effective.
Yeah, no question about it. And in our business, more data, accurate data, vetted data, complete data is always better than less. And I like your point where you are, bringing in more pieces to help either all your clients are this potentially, some very specific ones, so that they can make those data-driven decisions better and be able to place that, that pizza joint, that third pizza joint in Atlanta significantly better. Because that's what everybody wants. I mean, if I'm going to invest in data and I'm going to pay, whatever it is, I want to make sure I'm getting a return on it, and I want to, in an ideal scenario, I want to be able to use it in as many places as I can, and be able to take as good a value as I can in each one of those different, operational areas that might be where it might be valuable.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think one of the things we talk about quite a bit is the kind of the nice to have. And you hear this as a vendor very often. If you've ever kind of worked with or a technology company, you'll talk to a company and they'll ask you, well, are you a need or are you a nice to have? And I have increasingly resent the question, because if you look at retail specifically, look at Target and Walmart. In the midst of the pandemic, they had grocery delivery, buy online, pick up in store, curbside pickup, stuff that they were able to roll out instantly. They didn't make it up now. They had been investing in these capabilities for years and years prior, having a sense of where retail was going and what they would need. And essentially, they were constantly investing in the nice to have. Where is the future? Because if it's a need, you're too late. You should have been investing in this before. And I think the more we educate, whether it's retailers, technology companies, whoever else, marketers, operations, market planning, learning to live in the nice to have is how you stay ahead of the curve.
Yeah, and actually there is a really good article, I'll have to send it to you, on Steph Curry. And it sounds like you may have seen it, but the article is just, his goal is to do much, much, much better on getting 3-pointers, and he practices, but he practices so that he gets his margin of error is down into like the 1 or 2 inches. He could be 3 or 4 inches off, but he wants to get his margin of error on that basketball going through the hoop by only
Yeah.
1 or 2 inches. And what's interesting is to your nice to haves versus your need to haves is that the top performers think of things like that as a need to have, because I have to keep getting better. And I can't just stay the same. I have to get better and better. He has to get like, a millimeter, a millimeter, a millimeter on average better. And the best performers realize that want to have is not a want to have, it is a need to have, because they have to then stay ahead of the game. And so then I think you're right. I think Placer is one of those things. It's not a a nice to have. It is a need to have for exactly those reasons.
No, I think I love the Steph Curry example. Even it's interesting. I was having a conversation about this with another marketer of, if you think of the brilliance of the Warriors, is they built a team around something that used to be nice side role players. So 3-point shooting, I think Steph Curry's dad, great 3-point shooter. He was a wonderful role player alongside some great players who were the main pieces. Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, these 3-point shooters became the core of a strategy. And they said, all right, how do we build around this strength? And I think increasingly what we want to see in retail, but this applies to any business, is understanding what are your strengths? What are the things you do really well? How do you measure those things? How do you kind of measure improvements? But how do you build around those strengths? The fact, it's interesting. One of the most fascinating conversations we've had in the retail space is off-price retail and omni-channel. Think where we were in 2020. Burlington stores closed their e-commerce site. A month later, the pandemic hits. Every article was basically like, Burlington, you morons. You are so out of touch. Say goodbye to Burlington. Within a year, Burlington's numbers are higher than they've ever been. They're crushing. They're one of the best performing retailers in the space. And the takeaway isn't that e-commerce is bad or omnichannel is bad. It's just that Burlington e-commerce shouldn't be Macy's e-commerce or Target e-commerce or Amazon. It should be Burlington e-commerce. And the more companies utilize data, their data, other people's data, to understand who they are and what they should be in their market, that's where success comes. Take Amazon as well. Look at Amazon's grocery push. Amazon buys Whole Foods. Is it the greatest success we've ever seen? Probably not. Did it help define Amazon Go and Amazon Fresh, which are proving to be far more Amazon-ish in their nature and likely a better long-term solution for what they want to provide? Absolutely. And so this ability to kind of understand yourself, test things, but build around your core, build around your strength, that's what's going to drive a lot of great things in the retail space.
Yeah, absolutely. And even Walmart's acquisition of Jet initially was, I don't know whether, but they certainly have been able to get their e-commerce going. And I think they are going to give Amazon, as hard as it is, they are going to give Amazon a good run for the money on the e-commerce side.
Completely. I love the Walmart Jet example. To me is incredible because was the acquisition successful? If you just judge the acquisition of Jet, probably not. Did it make Walmart amazing at e-commerce? Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's a company that, we don't always think of as being super innovative, but constantly investing and trying to figure out what their future looks like. And that's why they are still such a massive retail giant. That's why we even think of them as capable of competing with Amazon, is because of that investment and that focus on innovation.
Well, and that's kind of where Steph Curry's example comes in. It's the best, always striving to do slightly better. So, but anyway, before we close, is there any one big message that you'd like to get across? I'd love to keep talking to you because I think there's really good stuff, but at some point we have to close. So is there any one big message that you'd otherwise like to get across?
I think the data accessibility and the data conversation, we need to start embracing that everyone in the organization needs to access data. And the more we do that, the more great ideas we're going to come up with, the better we're going to be able to embrace data in the future and the better decisions we're going to make.
Yeah, and I agree with that. Data transparency and data is is like a liquid, and if it gets across to everywhere, then that is ideal. And I think, to your point, that using the same data across the entire organization really makes a lot of sense. So unfortunately, I do have to close this out, but Ethan, thank you really so much. Thank you. It's been awesome. I'm a definite fan of the data and the research components that you provide, and it certainly helped to educate me, and hopefully the audience will also see the same thing. So in any case, then please visit Placer.ai, and there you'll find a lot more information on how you can use this geocentric data to your advantage, especially in retail, but there's certainly many other applications. And then lastly, please stay tuned for many other videos in this series on the backstory of marketing. Please visit marketingmachine.prorelevant.com/getting started. It's a mouthful, but marketingmachine.prorelevant.com/getting started. So Ethan, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. So much fun to do this.
Thank you.